Awesome. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure some folks may still be trickling in, but thank you guys again so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. My name is Ryan Ragu. I'm part of the team here at Northspyre, and I'm really excited to talk to you this afternoon about the idea of breaking into the LIHTC space with the help of Northspyre. One of the things we've noticed here at Northspyre is many of our traditionally market rate customers are starting to look into the space, starting to get into the space. A lot of folks are saying, we have one or two projects that we're working on currently are actually affordable. And it's no surprise given just the continued difficulty in the capital markets and everything that's going on that side. So we expect this trend to continue. And so for us, we're very excited to be able to support our customers in this capacity, in this area, through a very specific new set of add-on tools that we've come out with tailor-made for the affordable housing industry. So as we get into things here, this is sort of the agenda for the day, little introduction of myself, and then we'll walk through what we're hoping to accomplish during this webinar, some things we want you to be able to walk away from here with. And then we'll really get into sort of the meat and potatoes of some of the solutions that we've come out with around this topic and are pretty excited about. Things like very detailed source tracking and how that can potentially help us at the end of the job at our final cost certification, configurable draw templates, MWBE, tracking and reporting. And a big one there at the end, simplifying and being able to forecast whether or not we're going to meet the 50% test for any 4% bond deals. So some really critical things that we've been able to develop solutions around, and all from feedback from our customer base. And so we're excited to be able to bring this to you guys today. All right, so before we really get into it, I want to let you know that, as you see there on the screen, Northspyre is here to support you. These webinars that we're doing are part of a training initiative that we have, and really part of a much bigger picture, just one of the tools that you have in the tool belt in terms of support. You see on the screen, you also have your dedicated real estate transformation consultants. I fit into that role, and a lot of my colleagues there on the screen as well. We have our concierge help desk, really great resource that you can reach out to for any sort of technical needs that you may have. And you can email them. You see the email there on the screen, concierge@northspyre.com. You can also get them using the chat feature in Northspyre. So 2 easy ways to get a hold of those folks. And then we have our knowledge base, really, really great resource, up to over 350 articles in there at this point. Really great, quick how-to information as you're navigating the platform. Maybe you remember that, doing this particular thing is possible, but you forget the exact clicks and how you can go through that. So that's a searchable sort of database of information available to you as well. And then, like I said, this webinar is part of kind of a training initiative, a series that we have to make sure we're bringing you the latest and greatest information about Northspyre and making sure you get the most value out of this platform. And so you see here some of the recent webinars. June 25th is obviously the one that we are on today. And then we've got quite a few more coming up. So stay tuned for those. You can get information on those on our website, or you can reach out to your real estate transformation consultants and they can make sure you have that information as well. So like I said, we're really, really excited to kind of bring you guys this tool set today, this new set of solutions that we've come out with. And at a high level, these are some of the things that we heard from our customer base and wanted to come up with solutions around, right? The affordable housing industry, it's very complex. There's a lot of complicated lender requirements, and meeting compliance is absolutely critical in that space. And so facilitating, your compliance with ease, just making it easier to navigate all the complexities of the affordable housing space. And these sort of build on top of each other. So if we can sort of simplify the day-to-day, we can help you drive more predictable outcomes and ideally higher returns on your projects, right? Help you mitigate risk on the ground level, and it rolls up into cost savings and higher returns. That in turn helps us win more deals and also attract and retain top talent to our organization. So it's really something that we hope, could help you both on the ground project level, then also for your organization as a whole. Okay, so what are we actually talking about today, and what are we hoping that you walk away with? We've covered some of it already, but just to maybe reiterate a little bit, I want you to, at the end of this webinar, have a good understanding of how Northspyre can track sources to specific uses, how that can help us throughout the project, and also at the end of the project, on our final cost search, which we'll talk about a little bit more. The ability to build configurable or customizable draw templates to meet your various lender requirements, tracking and reporting on MWBE vendor utilization, and then again, being able to just simplify and tackle that very complicated and very critical 50% test. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing we want to talk about is the idea of tracking sources to specific uses. When you're working on an affordable development, a LIHTC development, it's critical to have a clear, sort of detailed tracking on your source utilization, especially with something like a 4% deal. You might have, 5 or more sources. Some of those sources are maybe local government contributions that come with the stipulation that they're only going to fund certain aspects, certain parts of the project. And so you've got to be able to keep track of that. And you need to have clear visibility at all times on how you're drawing down on each source and be able to ensure that all your spend is being associated with the correct source. And, maybe today you have a solution around this, but you're tackling it when the draw is put together. You've got like a different tab on a spreadsheet, and it's a pretty manual process. The accounting team is having to go through each invoice and make sure, the corresponding source is assigned. And again, it's just a very manual, labor-intensive process, and kind of can leave some room for confusion or error. Now, with Northspyre, we get the ability to sort of pair your budget lines to sources so that anytime an invoice comes in and it hits that particular budget line, we'll be able to assign it the appropriate source automatically. And then from there, you see that kind of in the upper portion of the screen here, and we'll get into the platform and look at this in more detail. But that's, kind of how it works on the back end. And then that all rolls up to give us sort of seamless real-time visibility into our source utilization across the entire project. So let's jump into the platform. We're going to get a little hands-on here, and we'll see what this looks like. So as I mentioned, we give you the ability. I go into my budget categorizations. This is sort of a back-end view of my budget structure. I can edit the details of my different budget lines here. And if I click into a budget line, say maybe this GMP line, where I want you to see if I go to advanced and funding source, I can specify a funding source for this budget line. And again, what's going to happen is once I have this set up, I'll go ahead and show you. Anytime an invoice comes into the project through our data inbox, you see that the system, not only has it scrubbed the document and pulled out the pertinent details of the invoice, but we also have teed up for us who the vendor is, what the budget line is, and now what funding source is going to fund that particular invoice. And so as this is happening on the invoice level, invoices are coming in, getting assigned to those sources automatically. And then it's all going to roll up for us here on the sources overview. So if I scroll down to kind of the middle of the page, I can see this sources utilization summary. This is getting updated for me in real time as those invoices come in. And because I've already signed the source to the budget line, as invoices come in, they get assigned to a source, and I can very quickly kind of track in real time my source utilization across the entire project. So again, very important concept to really have visibility on as you're doing an affordable project. And we make it pretty simple for you, right? There's some setup steps, and then it's kind of running for you and aiding you in this effort. Now, as I come down here, you'll see kind of a view by period, by requisition, or per draw, showing that, for each draw, here was the amount of the full funding request. Here's how we drew down on our different sources. And you'll notice that some of these have some red boxes around them. So maybe it's the case that you don't want to pair each individual budget line to a source. Maybe you're saying, Ryan, that's great, but It seems like a lot of work. And maybe you just have one source or two sources that are very specific in nature towards what those are going to fund. So you want to pair those. And then for the rest of them, maybe they can just sort of follow kind of a standard order of operations, right? You go from source one to source two to source three. So we can handle both of those types of source utilizations for you. And the way we tackle that second one is through this tranching logic that we have up here. So again, anything that's been paired already, that's going to be captured for us. And then if there's anything left over, if there's anything that hits a budget line that we haven't paired a source to, we can just tell the system, hey, for this entire balance remaining, follow this tranching logic. And what we're able to do if we come down here to source transactions, we can see that the system's going to do the math for us on this automatically. So again, as I've paired those budget lines to sources, invoices have come in and hit those. We're capturing that spend automatically, and we're assigning sources to those invoices automatically. And then for anything that's left over, the system can do the math for us and tell us, hey, based on the tranching logic you've set up of your sources, we believe, this balance needs to be funded, this portion from equity, this portion from the construction loan, this portion from your bonds, and so on. And I can very easily edit this. I can go to quick edit and adjust the numbers or specify a percentage. So we make it pretty simple for you, but again, kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So coming back to the deck here, again, this is a concept that's going to be really, really helpful for us throughout the project, as we just want to have a good line of sight as to how we're drawing down on each one of those sources. But it becomes particularly important as we get to the end of the job and we have to go through that final cost certification. Now, I know some folks will maybe aren't in the affordable space just yet. They're kind of looking at getting into it. So for those who may not be as familiar, this is one of the biggest hurdles that you have to go through towards the end of a project. It's final cost cert. You're going to, once the job is complete, you hire a third-party CPA firm, and they're going to do sort of this deep dive audit on all of your costs and want full tracking and full records and full visibility on how all of those costs were funded to make sure everything was done appropriately. And only once that process is done and submitted to the appropriate parties and approved will you receive the tax credit equity into your project. So this is something, if it's not handled efficiently and pretty seamlessly, can actually delay flipping over to getting our equity and putting our permanent financing in place. And that has a lot of, negative ripple effects into the job. So it's something that we need to be really cautious of being able to do efficiently. And again, it's one of those things that, maybe today it's spreadsheets, it's looking at each one of the draws, it's a lot of manual tracking. But in Northspyre, as you see here, once we've gone through kind of that initial step that we looked at, where we're pairing our budget lines to sources, we can pull down a couple things. We can pull down this source draw detail, and I can show you kind of a better view of that here. And so we're able to pull this report down, at the end of every requisition period and certainly at the end of the job. And what this is a sort of source by source look at my budget and how much this particular source has funded, both previously and then including this period and cumulative total, across my entire budget. And so you see here in this example for my affordable housing grants, I haven't funded anything up top here, but we start seeing some numbers down here. We have a really good picture of how this source has funded the project over the entire life of the project. And then I go to, if I keep scrolling here, it's a rather large budget. I go to my construction loan and so on and so forth. So you get the idea. I have really good, clean, easy, accessible reporting into how each source has funded the project. Now, when you go up the cost cert, you're going to need a very specific level of detail. You may need more detail than this. That third-party firm may come back to you and say, hey, this is great, but we need the detail as far as, each individual invoice, what source funded that invoice. And again, if you're not tracking that, or if you're doing it manually and maybe, something got missed in the shuffle of everything, it can be really, really time consuming to go back through and get all of that dialed in to get your cost cert finalized. But if we go back into Northspyre, again, once we've done that initial setup of pairing my budget lines to sources, I can just go to my invoice data index. This is going to show me my full list of all the invoices that I have in the project. And you'll notice here, once I sort of expand my details and I can see everything, I've already got which source has funded each one of these invoices. This has all been done for me automatically once I just did that initial pairing. So really, really powerful tool. We can export this to Excel, pass that off to our CPA firm, and get that cost cert taken care of pretty efficiently and pretty simply, whereas that's something that we know is weighing a lot of folks down today. So really powerful tools to kind of help you with some of those processes. Now, another thing we've heard from our customer base is the need for kind of a configurable draw report. One of the most difficult aspects of running affordable development is just a wide variety of lender requirements. You're working with multiple lenders, and each lender wants to see the information in their own way, in their own format, and there's no room for negotiation, right? It's a pretty specific set of requirements that you have to comply with. And so what our customers end up doing is every time they do a draw, you may take that same Excel spreadsheet and manipulate it, reconfigure it multiple times for each one of your lenders. And it's a manual process that you have to go through, essentially creating 5 or 6 draws every time you do a draw in order to appease those different lender requirements. And this can obviously be a pretty tedious process, but also if it's not handled correctly, it's going to delay the funding of that draw. And, that can obviously have some pretty negative impacts for our project. And so we want to make sure we're in compliance with this, we're keeping up with it, but it can be kind of tough. And so what we've come out with here in Northspyre, and again, we'll take a look at this in the platform itself, but we've come out with these configurable draw templates to where we can take your existing budget, recreate it, and then sort of rename and reconfigure it as needed, exclude anything that doesn't need to be included, and sort of just rework that information into the format that each one of your lenders wants to see. And then once you've done this, this is saved as a template, and you just, with a few clicks, are able to reproduce it at every single draw. So I'll show you, again, in the system what that looks like here. So if we go back to our budget categorizations page, again, this is sort of a back-end view of my budget. I have my full budget structure. I can edit the details of these different budget lines here. But what I want you to notice this time is these different tabs at the top. And if I wanted to create another one, I could just click on this plus. But all of these are different templates of the same draw. So pulling in the same cost information, you can see my original budget lines and budget structure here. But then over here on the left, this is how I've renamed and reconfigured a lot of this. We look at maybe this municipal affordable one. You'll see here's a really great example. In my original budget, I've got 3 different budget lines. I've got acquisition costs, miscellaneous closing costs, and bank and mortgage broker fees. So I've got 3 different budget lines living in 3 different places in my original budget. And I want to be able to track those costs in that way. But this particular lender wants to see all of that rolled up into one line named acquisitions. And so again, maybe today I'm having to manually do that through some sort of an Excel file, but here we can just sort of tee it up in that way. And then once we have this saved, we can go to our report builder. You can pull down a draw report and simply use one of our configurable draw templates. So we're not having to start from scratch. We set this up and then we're able to very easily rerun it every time and make sure we're meeting those different lender requirements. So also along the lines of just meeting requirements and making sure we're staying in compliance is the concept of tracking MWBE vendor utilization. And again, I know there's some folks on the call who maybe aren't in the affordable space yet. So if you're not too familiar with this, government funding will often come with the condition that a certain portion of the project be awarded to local women and or minority owned businesses. And it's a really important initiative. This is a way for local governments to ensure that this money is both going to a good use in terms of creating affordable housing in the community, but it's also going to local small businesses, again, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses in the community, and serves to just strengthen the community as a whole. So a really important initiative, and one that your lenders will be very keen on tracking and ensuring that that's being met with. And so we need to be diligent about being able to keep track of those things. And again, maybe today you've got a solution around this, right? But it's another spreadsheet or it's another tab on the draw. You're having to go through all the invoices and say, okay, of this batch of invoices, which one of my vendors fall into this different category? And then you go somewhere else to kind of add it in. And, it's, again, a little bit of a tedious kind of manual process, very important, but something that can be a big lift. And, if this is something that you're having to report on regularly, which is often the case, it makes sense to have a more intuitive solution in place. And so with Northspyre, what we have given you the ability to do is you can go into each one of your vendors and simply tag them as a women-owned business, minority-owned business. And here I can show you in the platform, we go to vendor management. I select a particular vendor and I edit that vendor. You can see here I've got quite a few options. So is it a disabled veteran-owned business, small business enterprise, disadvantaged business enterprise? So we've got a lot of different options that we can keep track of and make sure we're able to report to our lenders how we're using these funds and how we're being really good stewards of the resources that they're providing us. And once we have these tags in place, similar to the source tracking and some of these other things, we have this tag living in the background. And then as an invoice comes in, it's getting paired to that vendor. We know that that vendor belongs in one of these categories, and we can very simply and cleanly pull up this MWBE utilization report, showing us a really nice detailed view of what we've invoiced this period, what falls into these different categories, and then a cumulative total to date. And then we've got a breakdown by each specific vendor showing that information. And again, this is something that we can run with a few clicks once we have all of our vendors tagged. So it takes, a very important aspect of the project and allows us to do it pretty cleanly and simply, not have to think too much about it once we've got the appropriate measures in place. Alrighty, last but not least, we've had a lot of feedback around this one in the world of 4% bond deals. We understand that one of the most critical things is the LIHTC 50% test. And we know how big of a deal it is if you do not meet that 50% requirement and your bonds aren't funding, at least 50% of that basis cost, and how that can negatively impact our tax credit award and just our overall capital stack, right? And so you never want to be in a position where you're only realizing at the end of the job, you don't meet that 50% requirement. But it is something that's calculated at the end of the job once we've incurred our full spend, all of our costs. And so it can be difficult to keep track of that and sort of manage that ahead of time. Most groups who are in this space are relying on the draw, and they're sort of, looking across the entire draw, understanding which costs fall into their basis, and then seeing separately how their bonds are funding those different costs, and you run that calculation every time. And we're able to do that for you as well. But again, we want to empower you not just to have visibility on where you stand with that today, but to have a really clear line of sight as to, are you projected to meet that requirement at the end of the job or not? And if not, I want to give you the time to pursue some other avenues and do some other things that you need the time to do. So we'll show you what that looks like and then kind of come back to this screen, and we'll get here into Northspyre. And so the way we set this up, it's pretty simple. We're essentially going to tell the system what sources and what uses belong in this 50% calculation. So I'll start with the uses. If we go back to budget categorizations page, we've been there a few times today, and I can look at all my different budget lines, all my different uses, and I can come in here and tell the system that this cost belongs in my basis. So I can tag all of those costs that fall into that basis. And then on the sources side, I simply tell the system which one of my sources is my tax-exempt bonds. And so pretty simple. We're just going to tell the system again, what are the sources and what are the uses that belong in this 50% calculation. And the beauty of a lot of the things that we're seeing here today, this included, is once we do this setup step, Northspyre is going to kind of take the information from here and run with it. And so having this in place, you're able to pull down another version of that sources overview report that we looked at previously. This time, we could include some LIHTC metrics on it. And so here's just a different version of that report. Again, this is just pulled up in Report Builder. Once I've done the work of tagging my sources and my uses appropriately, I can run this with every single draw, and it's going to show me how I was doing previously prior to this draw. And we see in this case, prior to this draw, we were at 54%. And so the system color codes that for us. It's very obvious and apparent that we were in good standing as far as tracking towards our 50% test. But then this period, of all of our basis costs, bonds only funded about 3% of that. And so that brought our total down underneath the 50% threshold. And so we have a clear understanding of where things stand today. And based on this, I'm going to want to monitor that. But even if these sections down here were in green, even if this was over the 50% mark, being over that 50% mark today is no guarantee that I'm going to end the project in a safe position, right? We're incurring change orders and different cost adjustments all the time. Things are constantly moving. And so that basis cost is constantly shifting. And so it's important to, yes, have the understanding of where we stand today, but it's even more important to understand how we're looking out into the future. And so this is one that we're pretty excited about. If I get back into the platform here, what we've done is we've overlaid those, your bond source and your basis costs. We've taken that information and we're able to overlay it onto our cash flows tool. So here's our cash flows tool. We have a standard cash flow tool that exists today. But what we've added, you can see over here on the right, we've got this LIHTC compliance forecast. And what this is going to do, instead of our normal cash flow, which is considering all of our sources and all of our uses, this is only going to factor in those sources and uses that we just previously tagged in the recent example there. And it's going to forecast that out into the future based on our anticipated cost and show us, hey, here's where you are projected to end up at the end of the job. And do you meet the test or do you not? Now, in this case, this is a sample project. It's showing 102%. Realistically, this might be something like, 52 or 54%, something along those lines. And that would be great. But what we don't want is for it to say 48%, 45%, because then we've got a big problem. And we understand how, again, falling below that threshold, it's going to adjust our basis, adjust our tax credit award on the project, and leave us sort of with a big gap in our capital stack for this project. Now, if we are aware of this ahead of time, obviously, if you're in the space, you know how to navigate this issue, and you know that you have a couple options around potentially failing 50% test, right? You can go pursue a higher bond allocation, kind of increase that numerator, and so you would then meet the 50% test. Or you could kind of get creative with your costs, right? Maybe we can do a land lease instead of a land purchase and decrease our cost basis that way. And both, kind of pull on different levers to bring us back in line on that 50% test. But all of those things are things that you need time to do. And because this is calculated at the end of the project, and if you're in the space, you're all too familiar with the fact that you're often, you only get to know the result on this at the very end of the project, and you're often left playing the only card left you have at that point with the limited time that you have, which is reducing your developer fee in order to make the project work. And we want to put you in a more proactive place so that you have the time to pursue some other avenues so we can ensure we maintain profitability on this project while all these different things are shifting. Alrighty, and then coming back to my deck here, not that it's a groundbreaking slide, but I'll probably wrap up with a little bit of a story. I mentioned at the top that we're seeing more and more customers getting into this space. I was visiting with some of our customers in the Atlanta market last week. I sat down in the office with a team who has traditionally been on the market rate side. They've gotten into the LIHTC space with one project about 2 years ago. Fast forward to today, they're wrapping that project up. They just got an award for a new deal, and they're kind of shifting their focus more and more towards this space. And one of the gentlemen, we're sitting there in the conference room, and he looks at me and says, we have all of these market rate projects that we're just sitting on right now. We have land sort of at the ready, but these projects are stalled. Because of everything that's going on in the capital markets, these projects are teed up, but our lenders and our investors have backed out. But at the same time, over here on the affordable housing side of things, there's this constant and growing need. The demand is there. And, as a traditionally market rate investor, they have different objectives and ways that they typically look to make money on these deals. And he said to me, if this is something that allows us to stay in business and kind of keep the lights on, keep our team together while we're waiting for the capital markets to shift, that's what we're going to do. And that was one conversation out of, maybe 5 or 6 that I had that week with different groups who, to my surprise, were all telling me this similar type of thing. And so we recognize that there's significant need on the affordable housing side of things. And so there's a lot of opportunity in the space, but the requirements are only becoming more and more complex. And that's why here at Northspyre, we're really excited to be able to align with our customers on this and help groups who are maybe new to the space and looking at breaking into the LIHTC space for the first time, sort of shorten the learning curve, while also helping some of those more established groups become even more efficient. There's a lot more that we didn't get a chance to do a deep dive on today, but if you are curious about what you saw, you want to learn more and potentially get this involved for your organization, please reach out to your real estate transformation consultant. We'll be happy to get you set up with this and make sure you're getting all the value that you need out of the platform. So with that, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. And Lily, I'll maybe pass it back to you to kind of close things out.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you to everyone that joined and took time out of their day. If there were any questions that came through, I have them jotted down and we will get you an answer as soon as possible. So thank you again for your time and hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Bye, guys.